Teresa, we are live.
We are live. Good to see you Thursday morning. Welcome to Thursdays with Culture Talk. I am Teresa Agresta, one of the co-founders at Culture Talk, here with Cynthia Forstman, my sister and business partner of more than 20 years. And we are here to talk to you about culture. Today, we picked a big topic. We're going to focus on culture shift. How do you change the culture? Oftentimes, when we come here on a weekly basis, we're taking a piece of something. We're looking at how does culture impact recruiting? How does culture, and the whole idea of culture play into how we show up in leadership and in diversity. And so today we're kind of going to take a step back and maybe take a look down and look at this whole big topic of culture and look at how do you change a culture? How do you make a culture shift? And I think sometimes, go ahead.
I was going to say the 30,000 foot view, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of times with these interrelated business challenges that culture has such an impact on and is such an important part of, we're down there in the weeds and we're trying to push those pieces around one thing at a time. But we take that step back, what we can really focus on is the fact that if we're talking about recruiting, for instance, then we have to recognize the role that employment brand plays in that recruiting process. But we better quickly look at what the employee experience is if we want to understand what that employment brand is. So it's that one thing impacts another, that all of these things are interrelated and that there's a ripple effect that gets created when we start to take a look at one of them. Some of the other things.
I was going to say, we have a graphic that sometimes people comment on that's like a tree. And we talk about culture as an ecosystem, right? So all the things that are happening internally, they're all roots, but they're all part of the same tree that we call culture. And of course, externally, people are also experiencing kind of this whole cultural ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The tree is such a great analogy for that, because how you change one thing impacts the outcomes of other things as well. So how your leadership, for instance, shows up and what type of leadership role that the individuals in the organization are taking and what they're held accountable to will have an impact on the inclusion conversation, on how people feel from a belonging perspective. You can't really separate those things out, although we often attempt to pull them apart and address them one-on-one. So let's take a look at this sort of big picture. And think about, how do we look at it? So I think that when we're talking about culture, there's a couple of principles that are helpful to think about. How do you have an impact and create a program around culture that actually makes a difference and makes lasting change, that people can feel and, experience the difference after you've applied some of these ideas to it. So I think some of those there's three big ones.
Okay. What are they?
Inside out. Three principles, right? We have all kinds of numbers, right? Three of this and 5 of that, but change. Let's look at it from the inside out versus the top down. We want to make sure that everyone's involved. And we know that, principle number 2, change happens at the individual level. It doesn't happen just because a leader said we need to change. So we have to have a way to get people involved. We have to have a way to create more of a wave, right? We want to look at this as opposed to the leader, maybe as a rock star, standing up in front of a concert and clapping their hands and getting everybody to clap along because they showed an example. Well, that's great. But we'd rather look at it from the perspective of a wave, right? So a wave is self-generated. People understand that as it's going around, they start to
All right,
understand,
here comes
I
my
have
part.
to take it apart.
Here
Like
comes
literally,
my part.
here it
Mhm.
comes again. I have to jump in. And so this idea that it takes everybody and that everybody has a role to play really supports that inside out versus upside down thinking, around
Mhm.
change and
Yeah.
around culture.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that analogy before you go to number 3.
Yeah.
I love that analogy so much because, that wave, that audience wave, it's self-generated. People want to be a part of it. They want to jump in. And, if one department doesn't, right, the wave loses momentum.
Right.
Right. If we skip a section in the stadium, that wave loses momentum. So how do you create that kind of experience?
Yeah, nobody wants to be the one that, the section that drops the wave, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings us to point number 3, which is that you can look at culture as a repeating pattern. So it's a repeating pattern of behavior. Then we can start to recognize, what is the pattern? When is it my turn? What role do I play? And how can I then support the shift that we're trying to make? So looking at change as motivating each individual, understanding, having them buy in and decide to participate in the wave and notice what's going on around them and decide to participate and to play their role. So I think those 3 things are really important when we think about this big picture of culture.
Yeah. I'm also kind of reminded of, let's take integrative medicine, for example, in terms of there is a time and a place and a value to looking at the pieces and parts of an organizational system. So looking at all, right, looking at the individuals, looking at the beginning, you named all kinds of culturally related issues, right? And there is value in looking at all those individual parts, but we also need in integrative medicine to consider the whole. Like, how are all those parts rolling up? And that's where I really love the analogy of the wave, right? Like, what are they forming? What is that pattern when all of these parts and pieces are flowing in a particular order? How can we look at that from a holistic standpoint as well?
Right, absolutely. And so one of the ways that we do this, of course, we talk about archetype, and we've shared many times about the framework that we use at CultureTalk that looks at those patterns and gives you an opportunity to actually measure what are the patterns and in what ways are they repeating themselves. So if we were to take that 30,000 foot view, the first thing that we would do is do an audit to look at what are the repeating behavior patterns that we have at point A from where we are today, so that we can look at the whole and understand, to your point, some of the parts, so that we can, diagnose why are we repeating the patterns that might be, keeping us a little stuck or producing outcomes or results that we're unhappy with and that we're looking to change or to shift. And oftentimes, we're reacting to something that's happening outside of our control, but we still benefit from understanding what are the patterns that we are playing out. Because maybe we need to make a wholesale change, maybe we need to make a fast change, or to drive, different results in some aspect of our organization. So first step, look at where we are today by auditing the current culture and naming the patterns and communicating.
And just to point out too, when we do that measurement in a baseline culture audit, there's going to be parts of the pattern that are working, right? There isn't like,
Absolutely.
We don't think of culture as like a good or bad culture. We're looking at the patterns in terms of where are they empowering us and where are they disempowering us from that same, pattern of behavior.
Right, exactly. So the next thing is really to think about, what changes do we need to impact? How do we make a plan around that and really focus on a small number of manageable changes, but the ones that are going to make the biggest impact. So where can we begin? What's a good starting point where we can pull out a handful of changes that will begin to shift our culture in the directions that we want to go? So when we think about it from an archetype perspective, for instance, if we have a hero archetype that is strongly embedded in our culture, we might be experiencing the positive sides of that. So we want to keep those at play. For instance, we might be a really goal-oriented organization that sets the bar high and does a great job of inspiring our employees to reach further and work together.
Boom, 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 right? Yeah.
Right. So we don't want to move, we don't want to change that part of the culture. We just want to shine a light on it and call it out and name it and identify the specific behaviors that are contributing to that positive aspect. We might also, I don't think anybody would argue that a lot of cultures are experiencing significant burnout right now. And that's a key indicator of a hero culture gone south, right? So that's a shadow side. It's also part of other cultures, like a caregiver culture might also experience burnout. But those are, exactly. We can actually measure that and look at it and tie it back to particular things. And so those are the places that we want to take a look and make a plan to shift those behaviors without losing the inspiration and the motivation
of the hero.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So baseline culture audit tells us our starting point. Now we have created some specific strategies. We've noticed what our patterns are and where they are not functioning in healthy ways, in healthy, productive ways. Now we've got
one thing I want to say about that before we move on to the strategy is what an amazing experience it is to sit at the table with a team, group of leaders, integrated team with people coming from throughout the company, and to hear them validate these patterns and how quickly they can see what they're doing and how it's impacting them. And that how quickly they're able to align the actual actions and activities and behaviors of the team, the policies, the decisions, all the things that are playing into the pattern, and align them up so they can see what's working and then very quickly what's not working and why.
Yeah.
And it's just a very energizing
really aha moments when they go, oh my God, we do that, right?
I get it. I see it. Yeah.
It crystallizes our behavior. It crystallizes us being able to look objectively at our own behavior.
Right. And just going back to the place where we started this conversation today, when you think about if we're tackling any of or all of those other challenges, recruiting, retention, the employee experience, leadership, diversity, all of those things, we could literally lay them all out and call out the ways in which these patterns are showing up in each of those areas. So this is one of the reasons we kind of prescribe, certainly you can use a culture audit for one of those things specifically. There's tremendous benefit because you can go back to this same audit over time and dip back into the patterns and diagnose for a number of different, specific business challenges as well. So you can go at it either way. But I think one of the most exciting experiences is watching people and light bulbs going off and the recognition, because they can understand these stories and they can see these patterns themselves.
Yeah. What's the television show? It's This Is Us. Yes, this is us.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It would be a great reality show, right? Let's shine a light on a group going through this culture audit process.
Hold that thought. We could have a culture reality show in the future.
I like it. I like it.
So now talk me through, so we've got the audit, we've got the validation of those patterns. We have teams now putting together specific strategies in terms of how is this impacting the piece that I need to move? And how do I start to, what about, Teresa, at the individual level? How do you start to, because we said earlier, one of the change principles is that it's gotta, people change. It's not organizations that change. So how do you start tapping into that aspect of it?
Yeah, how do you get into the inside of each person as well? So it's the same process, really. We look at and we talk about measure, validate, activate. And for individuals, same thing. So the way that we approach it is measure my archetypal patterns. What are my motivations? Why am I here? What do I feel connected to in the culture? Are there some synergies between the way I show up and what's important to me and our purpose as an organization? How can I look at those things side by side and find my strongest points of alignment and understand what my motivators are? And then how do I compare to my colleagues? Like, how does our team come together so that we can tackle some of these changes? Maybe there are ways in which those key behavior changes call me out. So the organization is saying, okay, these are key behavior changes that we need to make as an organization. And I might do my own personal profile and say, oh my gosh, I not only sort of align with that challenging behavior, I'm a driver of that challenging behavior. I can see how my choices and the pattern that I'm repeating, that I've fallen into, supports and enhances the negative outcome that we're having as an organization. I'll give you one really interesting example of that. During a culture audit one time, I was working with JP Liqueur and Brand Foundations side by side at a company. They measured the caregiver archetype. And they really resonated with it. They articulated all the ways in which they really stepped up to the plate. Customer service was a huge aspect of what they prided themselves on. So never letting an issue drop, always being there and covering the needs of the customers. And then they talked about burnout and how they never felt like they really got a break. And they uncovered the truth that because they were so focused on customer service, they took their phone with them on vacation. They responded to their key clients at odd hours of the night and were coming back from vacation just as tired and refreshed as when they left. And what they recognized was they felt resentful and they felt angry. But wasn't it such a positive thing to be so customer focused? And, clearly coming up with this caregiver archetype really supported that. And so they made a plan and they made a pact and an agreement that they would shift some of their behaviors so that they could get out of that shadow side of the caregiver that doesn't know when to say no, that never sets appropriate boundaries, that actually rewards people. Like, people were coming back from vacation and being like, oh, wow, thank you so much for being
care of that while you were gone.
Yeah, and sticking with it even though you were on vacation. Here's an award. And so the entire team recognized that they were perpetuating. That was the wave that they kept in motion. People were recognized for the shadow behaviors and actually called out and rewarded for behaviors that they were feeling resentful about and that were burning them out and causing real problems in the culture. So the agreement, again, simple lens, an agreement made that I will, not do that. I will get my work to a point and get my colleagues aligned around supporting me. I will ask for help and I will leave on vacation knowing that I will not pick up my phone and that my back is covered. And it's a very, makes a defining difference in a very clear way. You can tell whether somebody answered their phone from vacation or not. Those are measurable behavior changes.
Or their email. Yeah, or their email. I also want to comment that because we're using the framework of archetype, there is one language. There is the common language that we are using to look at the organization's behavior patterns, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and where are they serving us not. But then we're using that same simple story-based lens to look at our own behavior patterns. And to your point earlier, Teresa, where am I actually the cause of some of the organizational behavior patterns? Like, what's my piece in it? And I just want to say, it's such a powerful thing to have a single language operating in an organization where it's a shortcut, right, to understanding where are we right now in this moment. And, am I as an individual, are we as a team, or are we as an entire organization, again, in that healthy expression of a pattern, or in the disruptive version of the same pattern?
Right. And how to even just call that out and show everybody. Mm-hmm. This is what will happen when we've stepped over that line into the unhealthy behavior. And it's really clear. And then it becomes something that's tangible. And then that tangible shift. So what do we do instead? How do we create different commitments that uphold the real values that we're trying to? Because what happens is, as well, like, go back to that caregiver culture, is we have a value. It's posted on the wall. Customer service comes first. Now I'm kind of making this part up, based on this one experience, but that value, we can look at it and point to it and say that's a positive thing. But if we don't also point to where's the line, where is it that we've gone over into the shadow side of that pattern, then people don't understand, where to stop that behavior.
Yeah, where are the guardrails?
Where are the guardrails? Right.
Part of the strategy for culture shift kind of work can be, once you identify those patterns that are going awry, how do we establish, as part of our strategy, guardrails around not allowing ourselves to go there, or at least being able to call it out and know, we're slipping into that pattern.
Well, and I mean, one of the things this company did was stop rewarding people for picking up the phone on vacation and begin rewarding people who had developed that support system so that they didn't pick up the phone when they were on vacation. So it was a real shift in what we recognized and in what we rewarded. Anyway, when you think about the individual, right, there are many ways in which holding ourselves accountable and understanding how each of us shows up can really play a positive impact in the outcomes that we see in the culture as well. So one of them is, how do my patterns play out against these changes we're trying to make as an organization? Where do I have like an attitude of openness to change, and where might I kind of, if I don't check in and recognize and make a point of focusing on it, that I'm actually resisting the change. And so I might agree because I'm supposed to, maybe I even sign off and say, yeah, I agree to these changes, but underneath it, on an unconscious level, on a real commitment level, I haven't really made the commitments to the change.
Yeah. I haven't put my heart in. Yeah.
So tying those things together, being able to really get at those underlying personal motivators, bring them to the light, and invite people to ask for help. Maybe you need more training. Maybe you need more support. Maybe you need a reminder, a buddy. Maybe you need a new policy. There are many different ways you can ask for support in how you're going to be part of the wave, how you're going to support the culture shift or the changes that the organization is looking to make.
Yeah. So I'm also experiencing, as our conversation continues, starting with this big system, and now we're diving into the different parts and pieces. And in all cases, it's all human, right? When we get into this kind of change, it's capturing the desire, the motivation, the intent, the agreement, the buy-in, it's rallying people around ideas. And it's another reason why I think the archetype as a system is, it's simple. It's not there's a lot of complex change models, right? That maybe takes like a PhD, right? To help an organization or a leader understand how they need to move through a change initiative. where this process that we're talking about really is just tapping into this common human way of looking at ourselves and each other all together, that is takes all that complexity out. And it's not that there aren't, we're describing all these different layers. It's not that we're not trying to say it's easy. Right? We're not trying to say it's easy. We're trying to say that we overcomplicate it, and that really, at a human level, we share these drivers. I think we even share a desire to get aligned around things.
And I think a desire for everyone to be successful. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, underlying it, there's lots of research and evidence that says that human beings are designed to collaborate. We see so many workplaces where you go in and there's an inherent sense of competition, and yet we are designed to collaborate. That's how we've succeeded. So our inherent, as a species, and our inherent desire is to collaborate and help everybody be successful. Now there's another argument for that with survival of the fittest, which maybe sometimes gets more play. But how can we pull on the nature of human beings to collaborate, to look for the common win, for everybody to come together? And I think that
to stay open, to stay curious, to lean in, and story, just like our brains. There are studies that talk about neural coupling. When we tell stories, like our brainwaves start to go, oh wait, we're in this together, and our heartbeats. There's new research that came out last year that talks about how when we tell story, our hearts, all of that starts to get synchronized. And I think it's just, it's part of our biology, and leaders and organizations that recognize how to bring people in. Really, that's what we want.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. And the construct of a story, leaders have been told for a long time now, well, you should be using story, right? So the leadership needs to lean into and develop and tell stories, but no real instruction book on how to do that effectively. How do you tell a good story that has a compelling impact on people, that really gives them something to hold on to? Becomes, we talk, when we do this work and we look at the stories, we really try to drive out what are those institutional stories, because they're a piece of it, right? That's a clue. It's a piece of it. The institutional stories, the things that get told over and over again. And there's a reason why stories stick with us and inform our behaviors, whether we're using them consciously or they're subconsciously informing our behaviors. And archetype in this whole system allows you, it kind of gives you a little bit more of a blow-by-blow about how to tell a story.
Handbook.
Right. It makes it easy. It makes it easy to tell my story and create structure around it and share the pieces and parts of yourself and how they formed and why, and the experiences that you've had in your life that have shaped your opinions. And then it's really amazing to hear from that perspective and through that lens, someone else tell their story. Mm-hmm. And then you can start to imagine this organization having its own stories. And that's the story of us together.
Yeah, this is us. And the walls come down as we have permission to share our stories. And, there's vulnerability in that, but there's also this innate safety that gets created in the space of having a framework through which to tell your story. So any finer points we want to put a point on here, Teresa, before we wrap up this Thursday?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I know, we're talking about the big view here, right? Maybe just to close out with the idea that, think about the big view of your culture and understanding what those stories are and what those patterns are that make up the wave at your organization. and think about the opportunity to take a look at from a 30,000 foot, as opposed to feeling like you always need to diagnose at the ground level.
Get in the weeds. Yeah.
Right. And sometimes starting with the big view will really have a positive impact on those projects and those unique areas, where you might have specific responsibility, but without any understanding of what the big patterns are, it can be challenging to start shifting around the pieces and parts. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we have, if you are curious about CultureTalk and, the tool set that we're referring to, the archetypal assessments and methodologies of measure, validate, activate, we do have a whole network of partners in 15 different countries right now that may have a specialty in a specific area, but actually also do come together for larger culture transformation initiatives. Reach out to Teresa or I. We're happy to hear what you're working on and maybe make some introductions to you. Or if you are curious about actually using the system and bringing these ideas, this sort of simple big idea of archetype into your organization or into your client engagements, we do have a certification program. It's an 8-week online program. Our next classes will begin September 6th. So if you'd like some more information about that, reach out to one of us. We're happy to tell you more about that program. You can also find it on our website. I'll include a link at the bottom of the video. So a good 4th of July weekend to all of you here in the US.
Absolutely. I think actually without planning it, we're dressed in celebratory colors. Just notice that.
Perfect. Yes.
Awesome. Yes. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for being here. Leave us some comments and ideas, questions. We'd appreciate it. Thank you.